The scent of pine and frost clung to everything in the sanctuary, a bitter perfume that masked the underlying tension. Winter had descended upon our packlands with unusual ferocity, forcing everyone into closer quarters than comfort allowed. I pulled my threadbare sweater tighter around my shoulders, trying to appear smaller as I navigated the crowded main hall, where pack members gathered for the monthly assembly. Being an Omega in a world dominated by alphas and betas meant learning how to move like a ghost, how to fade into backgrounds, how to make yourself forgettable. My pale blonde hair, the one feature I couldn't easily conceal, was tucked beneath a simple knitted cap, a gift from my grandmother before she passed. She had woven it with strands of her own silver hair, telling me, "When you wear this, child, you carry my protection." The memory of her words had become my talisman in moments like these, when my heart hammered against my ribs and my palms grew damp. "Make way for the Alpha King." The command boomed through the hall, and the crowd parted like water breaking against stone. I pressed myself against the rough wooden wall, ducking my head as Alpha Darius entered with his entourage. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world, his shoulders broad beneath a cloak of midnight fur, his dark beard neatly trimmed around a jaw that rarely softened in smile. At his side walked his beta commanders, and behind them, trailing with reluctant steps, was a boy of perhaps 7 or 8 years, the Alpha King's son. Even from my position at the periphery, I could sense the pup's distress. His small face was contorted in a scowl that mimicked his father's, but his eyes betrayed a wild panic. This was Prince Leo, the subject of endless pack gossip. His mother, the former Luna, had abandoned the pack 3 years ago, leaving her mate and child behind. Since then, the boy had become notorious for his hatred of women. No female attendant lasted more than a few days in his presence before being driven away by his tantrums and cruelty. "The winter has brought challenges," Alpha Darius began, his voice filling the hall without effort. "The eastern border has reported 3 rogue wolf incursions this month alone." I should have been listening. Pack meetings were mandatory after all. But my attention remained fixed on the boy. He was tugging at his ceremonial jacket, his distress growing more evident by the second. Then, as if sensing my gaze, he looked up. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and in that instant, something inexplicable passed between us. Not warmth, not understanding, but a moment of pure recognition. The pup's eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. He bared his small teeth at me in what could only be described as a snarl. I quickly lowered my gaze, heart racing. What had possessed me to make eye contact with the Alpha's son? Omegas knew better than to draw attention to themselves, especially from the royal family. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. "Keep your eyes down, but your spirit up, little one." "And so we welcome volunteers for the winter patrol," Alpha Darius was saying, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "Those with healing gifts are particularly needed at the border outposts." My fingers instinctively touched the small pouch of dried herbs I kept in my pocket. Healing was my only gift, the one ability that occasionally made me valuable rather than merely tolerated. I had inherited my grandmother's knowledge of plants and remedies, along with her intuitive understanding of pain, both physical and otherwise. "I volunteer," I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. A murmur rippled through the crowd as heads turned, searching for the speaker. The Alpha King's gaze found me, his expression unreadable. "Step forward, Omega." I moved through the parting crowd, conscious of every eye upon me. My legs felt hollow, my steps uncertain. Standing before Alpha Darius, I fought the urge to shrink into myself, focusing instead on the steady weight of my grandmother's cap upon my head. "Your name?" he asked, his voice slightly less thunderous at this proximity. "Alara, Alpha." I managed to meet his eyes for the briefest moment, before lowering my gaze respectfully. "I have training in herbal medicine and wound treatment. An Omega healer," he mused, and I couldn't tell if his tone held disdain or interest. "You understand the dangers of border service? The rogues we face are not known for mercy." Before I could answer, a small but powerful force collided with my legs. Prince Leo had launched himself at me, his small fists pounding against my thighs as he snarled, "No, no more women. They all leave. They all lie." The hall fell silent, the collective breath of the pack held in shock. No one touched the alpha's son without permission. No one. Acting on instinct rather than reason, I dropped to one knee, bringing myself to the boy's level. I didn't attempt to restrain his flailing hands or soothe him with empty words. Instead, I simply existed in his storm, letting him expend his fury while I remained steady. "I hate you," he spat, his small chest heaving. "I hate all of you." "I know," I said quietly, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. "That's okay." His assault paused momentarily, confusion crossing his features. He'd clearly expected fear, tears, or anger, the usual responses he provoked from women in the pack. My acceptance of his hatred seemed to bewilder him. "You smell like pine trees," he said accusingly, as if this were somehow a personal affront. I nodded. "I gather pine resin for medicine. It gets in your skin after a while." The boy's nostrils flared as he drew in my scent more deliberately. Something in his rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. I knew this moment was precarious. One wrong move could reignite his rage, or, worse, draw the alpha's punishment for my presumption in addressing the prince so directly. "Leo." Alpha Darius's voice cut through the tension. "Return to my side." The boy hesitated, his eyes still locked with mine. In that suspended moment, I saw past his anger to the wounded creature beneath, a child whose mother had left, whose father was distant, whose world had been defined by abandonment. I recognized that pain because it lived in me too, an old companion that had shaped the contours of my existence since my parents had perished in a territory dispute when I was barely older than Leo was now. "It's okay to be angry," I whispered, low enough that only he could hear. "But it isn't okay to stay that way forever. It gets heavy after a while." Something flickered in his eyes, not understanding perhaps, but a kind of grudging curiosity. Then he turned and walked back to his father, though his usual stomping was replaced by a more measured pace. Alpha Darius regarded me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You will report to Beta Commander Thorn for border assignment," he said finally. "Be prepared to depart at first light tomorrow." I bowed my head in acknowledgement, relief washing through me that my interaction with the prince had not earned me punishment. As I straightened, I caught sight of an older man standing slightly behind the alpha. His advisor, from the ceremonial markings on his robes, the man was studying me with a calculating interest that sent a chill down my spine. "The meeting is concluded," Alpha Darius announced, and the crowd began to disperse, conversations rising like the buzzing of disturbed bees. I turned to leave, eager to prepare for tomorrow's journey, when a small voice cut through the noise. "Wait." Prince Leo had broken away from his father again and was standing a few paces from me. The hall quieted once more, all eyes moving between the prince and the Omega he had addressed. "You're not scared of me," he said, half question and half accusation. I considered my answer carefully, aware of the listening ears all around us. "I'm scared of many things, Your Highness. But angry pups aren't among them." A few shocked gasps echoed through the hall at my boldness. Even the alpha's eyebrows rose slightly. But Leo's reaction surprised everyone. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the nearest approximation he might have managed in years. "You'll come back?" he demanded, the question carrying layers of meaning that broke my heart. "You won't leave like she did?" I knew I shouldn't make promises I couldn't keep. Border duty was dangerous, and an Omega stood little chance against determined rogues, but looking into those wounded eyes, I found myself nodding. "I'll come back," I said, the words feeling like a vow etched into my bones. Leo stared at me for a long moment, before turning and walking away, his small shoulders set in a rigid line. As the crowd dispersed, I felt the weight of what had just transpired settle over me. Somehow, in the space of a few minutes, I had entangled my fate with that of the Alpha's son. As I made my way back to my small cabin at the edge of pack territory, the snow began to fall more heavily, erasing my footprints almost as soon as they were made. The forest around me creaked and groaned under the weight of winter. And in that moment, I felt achingly alone. What had I done? Volunteering for border patrol was dangerous enough, but drawing the attention of the royal family was potentially deadly. My hand touched the pouch of herbs at my belt, seeking comfort in the familiar shapes within. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper on the wind. Sometimes the most broken creatures are the ones most in need of healing, little one. And sometimes, in healing others, we heal ourselves. I paused at my cabin door, looking back at the distant lights of the pack compound. Somewhere in that collection of buildings, a small boy with angry eyes and a wounded heart was perhaps thinking of the Omega who hadn't flinched at his rage. And despite the danger ahead, despite the uncertain path I now walked, I felt a strange flicker of something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Dawn broke reluctantly over the packlands, pale fingers of light struggling through heavy clouds pregnant with snow. I had barely slept, spending most of the night organizing my meager belongings and preparing bundles of herbs and tinctures that might prove useful at the border outpost. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping dried arnica for bruises, willow bark for pain, and yarrow for wounds that wouldn't close. Each bundle was a prayer of sorts, a hope wrapped in knowledge. My grandmother had taught me that healing wasn't just about the properties of plants, but about the intention with which they were gathered and prepared. Your hands remember what your mind forgets, she used to say as she guided my fingers through the process of crushing, steeping, and binding. A sharp knock at my door startled me from my reverie. The sky had barely lightened. It was too early for my escort to the border. Wiping my hands on my worn trousers, I moved cautiously to the door and pulled it open. Beta Commander Thorn stood on my threshold, his broad shoulders dusted with fresh snow, his expression as frigid as the air that swirled around him. Behind him, barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom, waited 3 pack warriors, their breath forming clouds in the bitter cold. Omega Alara, Thorn said, my designation preceding my name as was custom when addressing those of lower rank. There has been a change of plans. My stomach tightened. Had the Alpha reconsidered? Was I being punished after all for my interaction with Prince Leo? You're needed at the pack house, he continued, his voice revealing nothing of his thoughts. The Alpha commands your presence. Relief mingled with fresh anxiety. Not punishment, then. At least not immediately, but a summons to the very heart of pack hierarchy was hardly reassuring. Now? I asked, glancing back at my half-packed supplies. Now, Thorn confirmed, his tone allowing no argument. Bring your healing supplies. The request was unexpected enough to make me pause. Is someone injured? A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed Thorn's face. Prince Leo is unwell. The Alpha believes your unique approach might be beneficial. Understanding dawned with a mixture of dread and strange vindication. Something had happened with the prince after our encounter. I quickly gathered my most versatile remedies into a leather satchel, wrapped my grandmother's shawl around my shoulders beneath my threadbare coat, and followed Thorn into the biting cold. The walk to the pack house was conducted in silence, our small procession moving through the sleeping settlement like wraiths. Fresh snow muffled our footsteps, and in the distance, I heard the mournful howl of a wolf on patrol, a sound that always stirred something primal and lonely within me. My wolf, quiet and submissive as befitted an Omega, whined softly in response. The pack house rose before us, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that had stood for generations, each Alpha adding rooms and wings until it resembled a small fortress more than a home. Warm light spilled from scattered windows, a sharp contrast to the blue-gray dawn. We were ushered through side entrances and servants' corridors, a reminder of my status despite the Alpha's summons. The interior of the pack house was warm to the point of discomfort after the bitter cold outside. Rich scents of pine resin, wood smoke, and something distinctly Alpha, a powerful, dominant musk, filled my nostrils. My Omega instincts urged submission, head lowered, shoulders hunched, making myself smaller in the presence of such overwhelming dominance. But my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Stand straight, little one. Being an Omega doesn't mean being nothing. I straightened my spine as we approached a heavy wooden door guarded by 2 stone-faced warriors. Thorn nodded to them, and one opened the door without a word, revealing what appeared to be the prince's chambers beyond. The room was in chaos. Furniture lay overturned, bedding torn and scattered across the floor. The scent of distress and rage hung heavy in the air, making my eyes water slightly, and in the center of it all, Alpha Darius stood with his arms crossed, looking down at a small, trembling figure huddled in the corner. Prince Leo had shifted partially, caught between his human and wolf forms in the way of untrained pup shifters. Fur sprouted from his arms and face, his teeth elongated into canine points, his eyes glowing with amber wolf light. He was growling, a continuous rumble of threat and fear. "She's here," Thorn announced, giving me a small push forward. The alpha turned, his expression a careful mask. Up close, I could see the fatigue etched around his eyes, the strain of leadership and fatherhood weighing visibly upon him. "Omega Ilara," he acknowledged. "My son has been unreachable since the assembly. He refuses his attendance and has not slept. His partial shift has persisted for hours, which is dangerous for one so young." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Young shifters could become stuck between forms if emotional distress triggered an uncontrolled transformation. The consequences could be severe: physical deformity, mental impairment, or worse. "May I approach him, Alpha?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and even. Alpha Darius stepped aside, a gesture both permission and challenge. The room's other occupants, a nervous-looking attendant, another beta warrior, and an older man I recognized as the Alpha's advisor from the assembly, watched with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. I set my bag down and moved slowly toward Leo, making no sudden movements. His growl intensified as I drew closer, his small body coiling tighter against the wall. "Hello again, Prince Leo," I said, stopping at a respectful distance. "It seems you're having a difficult morning." "Go away," he snarled, the words distorted by his partially transformed mouth. "I can't do that," I replied honestly. "Your father asked for my help, and I promised you I would come back. I keep my promises." His growl faltered slightly, confusion flickering across his features. I lowered myself to sit cross-legged on the floor, deliberately making myself smaller and less threatening. "You know, my grandmother told me that being caught between forms feels like wearing a jacket that's too tight in some places and too loose in others." Leo's amber eyes fixed on me with suspicious interest. "Did you know that wolves have special fur that humans don't?" I continued conversationally. 2 layers, a soft undercoat and coarser guard hairs on top. That's why it feels itchy sometimes when you start to shift. The prince's growling had ceased, though his breathing remained rapid and shallow. "I'm going to take something from my bag," I told him, moving very slowly as I reached for my satchel. "It's just pine oil. It might help with the itching." I uncorked a small vial, letting the sharp, clean scent of pine fill the air between us. Leo's nostrils flared as he caught the familiar smell, the same scent he had commented on at our first meeting. "You smell like the forest," he muttered, his voice a little more human now. "Yes," I agreed. "The forest is where I feel safest." "Where do you feel safest, Prince Leo?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. His brow furrowed, and for a moment, the fur on his face receded slightly. "Nowhere," he said finally, the word carrying a weight no child should bear. My heart ached for him, this small boy with a prince's title and a pauper's emotional inheritance. "I understand," I said softly. "When my parents died, I felt that way too, like there was no safe place left in the world." Something in Leo's posture shifted, a subtle relaxation, a lowering of defenses. "Your parents died?" I nodded. "When I was 9, there was a territory dispute with a neighboring pack. They were defending our borders, like you're going to do," Leo said, his voice suddenly sharp with fresh anxiety. The fur on his arms bristled visibly. "Yes," I admitted, seeing no point in lying. "But I'm very good at staying safe, and I promised I would come back, remember?" The prince's eyes narrowed. She promised too. She lied. I didn't need clarification to know he meant his mother. The wound of her abandonment was still raw, still bleeding into every interaction Leo had with the world, especially with women. "I'm not her," I said simply. "I can only speak for myself, and I don't make promises lightly." Leo studied me with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his features began to shift back toward human, the fur receding, his teeth returning to normal size. "Can I show you something?" I asked, reaching again for my bag. He gave a curt nod, curiosity overcoming caution. I pulled out a small wooden carving of a wolf, worn smooth by years of handling. My grandmother made this for me after my parents died. She told me to hold it when I felt scared or alone, and to remember that wolves are never truly alone because they carry their pack in their heart. Leo's eyes fixed on the carving, his expression unreadable. After a moment's hesitation, I held it out to him. "Would you like to hold it?" His hand, fully human now, reached out tentatively. When his fingers closed around the carving, I saw his shoulders relax, as if some invisible burden had lightened momentarily. "It's warm," he said, sounding surprised. "Wood holds the warmth of hands that touch it," I explained. "My grandmother said that's why wooden things feel alive sometimes." Leo turned the carving over in his palms, tracing the simplistic curves and lines with small fingers. "Did it help? When you were scared?" "It did," I said truthfully. "Not because it's magic, but because it reminded me that someone cared enough to make it for me, that I wasn't really alone." The prince's eyes lifted to mine, and in them I saw the first fragile tendril of trust taking root. Can I keep it until you come back?" The request caught me off guard. The carving was one of my few tangible connections to my grandmother, a talisman that had seen me through countless dark nights and difficult days. But looking at the small boy before me, his vulnerability so carefully hidden beneath layers of anger and hurt, I couldn't refuse. "Yes," I said, "until I come back." A throat cleared behind us, and I turned to find Alpha Darius watching the exchange with an expression I couldn't interpret. I had almost forgotten we had an audience. "The boy appears calmed," said the older advisor, his keen eyes moving between Leo and me with calculating interest. "Perhaps the Omega's services at the border can be delayed." Alpha Darius considered this for a moment. "No," he said finally. "We need healers at the outposts," and she volunteered freely. His gaze shifted to me. "You will depart as planned, but you will return to check on my son in 1 week's time." It wasn't a request, but a command, delivered with the full weight of Alpha authority. I bowed my head in acknowledgement, even as my mind raced with the implications. Weekly travel between the border outpost and the pack house was uncommon and potentially dangerous, especially for an Omega traveling alone. "Father," Leo's voice, small but steady, broke the silence. "I want her to teach me about plants." "When she comes back." The Alpha's eyebrows rose in surprise. His son had shown little interest in learning anything from anyone in recent years, preferring isolation and tantrums to education. "We will discuss it," he replied, which was neither agreement nor refusal. Leo's fingers tightened around the wooden wolf. "She promised to come back." Something flickered across the Alpha's face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. "Yes," he said quietly. "So she did." I rose to my feet, sensing that the immediate crisis had passed, and my presence was no longer required. "With your permission, Alpha, I should prepare for departure." He nodded. "Commander Thorne will escort you to the border patrol. Be ready within the hour." As I gathered my bag, Leo moved suddenly, crossing the distance between us to press something into my hand. I looked down to find a small silver button, probably torn from one of his ceremonial jackets during his earlier rage. "So you remember to come back," he said fiercely, his eyes challenging me to refuse. I closed my fingers around the button, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic. "I won't forget," I promised. As Thorne led me from the room, I glanced back to see Leo watching me leave, the wooden wolf clutched tightly in his small hand. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of his room with my carving as his only comfort, he looked like what he truly was beneath the title and the tantrums. A child, wounded and wanting. Just like the rest of us. Outside, the snow had started falling again, thick flakes that melted against my skin like tears, the silver button pressed into my palm, cool and solid. A pledge I wasn't entirely sure I could keep but desperately wanted to honor. The border awaited, with all its dangers and uncertainties. But somehow, the thought of a small boy counting the days until my return made the journey ahead feel less like an ending, and more like a beginning. The border outpost was a stark collection of wooden structures huddled against the mountainside, like frightened children seeking protection from a storm. After 3 days of arduous travel through snow-laden forests, the sight of smoke rising from stone chimneys should have been welcoming. Instead, as our small group approached, I felt the weight of watchful eyes and unspoken judgments. "Home, sweet home," muttered Thorn, his breath clouding in the frigid air. He had been taciturn throughout our journey, speaking only when necessary, his demeanor making it clear that escorting an Omega was beneath his station. The outpost gate, little more than a reinforced wooden barrier, creaked open at our approach. A weathered beta guard nodded to Thorn before his gaze fell upon me, curiosity and dismissal warring in his expression. "This is the healer?" he asked, not bothering to address me directly. "Omega Alara," Thorn confirmed. "Alpha's orders." Something in his tone made me glance sharply at him. There was more being communicated than the simple fact of my assignment. I had assumed I was here solely because I had volunteered, but the subtle exchange between the men suggested otherwise. The compound beyond the gate was alive with activity despite the bitter cold. Warriors in winter furs moved with purpose between buildings, some carrying weapons, others transporting supplies. The scent of alpha and beta wolves hung heavy in the air, making my Omega instincts prickle with awareness. I was very much in the minority here. Perhaps the only Omega in the entire outpost. "The healing hut," Thorn said, gesturing to a small structure set slightly apart from the others. "You'll work there. Sleep there too." I nodded, adjusting the strap of my bag where it dug into my shoulder. After days of travel, my muscles ached with fatigue, and my stomach gnawed with hunger. But I knew better than to complain or ask for rest. Omegas were expected to serve without fuss, to accept whatever accommodations were provided with gratitude. "There are 3 wounded inside," Thorn continued, already turning to leave. "Border Patrol encountered rogues 2 days ago. Nothing life-threatening, but infection is setting in." "Wait," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Thorn paused, his eyebrows rising in surprise at my tone. "I need to know what I'm walking into. How many rogues? What kind of attacks? Has anyone died?" The commander studied me for a moment, as if reassessing his initial judgment. 5 rogues spotted in the last week. 3 engaged. Claw wounds mostly, 1 bite to the shoulder. No casualties on our side. He paused, then added with grim satisfaction, 2 rogues won't be troubling anyone again. I absorbed this information, mentally cataloging the supplies I would need. "And what aren't you telling me?" I asked quietly. "Why am I really here?" Thorn's expression hardened. "You're here because you volunteered, Omega, and because the Alpha commanded it." But there was something evasive in his gaze that confirmed my suspicions. I was missing pieces of a larger picture. "Report to Captain Nolan when you've settled the wounded," he said, ending the conversation by striding away toward what appeared to be the command building. Left alone, I took a deep breath, centering myself before approaching the healing hut. The scent of blood and sickness reached me before I even pushed open the door. Metallic and sour, undercut with the sharp tang of fear. Inside, 3 men lay on narrow cots, their faces drawn with pain. 2 were conscious, watching me with wary eyes as I entered. The third, a young beta with a nasty wound visible on his exposed shoulder, tossed in feverish sleep. "You're the healer?" One of the conscious men, an alpha by his scent, pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing with the effort. "I am," I replied, setting my bag down and washing my hands in the basin provided. The water was cold, but I welcomed the sting of it against my skin. It helped sharpen my focus. "I need to examine each of you. They said they were sending a real healer," the Alpha muttered, eyeing my slender frame and Omega status with obvious skepticism. I met his gaze steadily as I dried my hands. "I assure you I am quite real." The second conscious patient, an older beta with gray streaking his temples, gave a short bark of laughter. "She's got spirit, Rafe. Give her a chance before you start complaining." I approached the feverish young beta first, as his condition seemed most urgent. The bite wound on his shoulder had been cleaned but poorly dressed, allowing infection to take hold. The flesh around the punctures was angry red and hot to the touch. He moaned when my fingers gently probed the area. "How long has he been feverish?" I asked, already reaching for my supplies. "Since last night," the older beta supplied. "Devon's only been with the patrol for 2 months. First serious injury," I nodded, unpacking dried herbs, clean bandages, and the small collection of tinctures I had prepared before leaving. "I need hot water and clean cloths," I said, not looking up from my work, "and someone needs to hold him when I clean the wound. It will be painful." To my surprise, both conscious men moved to help without argument. The alpha, Rafe, despite his initial skepticism, limped to the small stove to heat water, while the older beta positioned himself to help restrain Devon when needed. I worked methodically, first creating a poultice of yarrow, garlic, and pine resin to draw out the infection, then preparing a tea of willow bark and echinacea to bring down the fever. As my hands moved, I spoke softly to Devon, explaining what I was doing, even though he was too far gone in fever to understand. "You're good at this," the older beta observed as I carefully cleaned the wound. "Where did you learn?" "My grandmother," I replied, not elaborating. The less these warriors knew about me, the better. Sharing personal details created connections, and connections created vulnerabilities. I had already made that mistake with Prince Leo, allowing emotion to override caution. The thought of the young prince sent a pang through my chest. Was he still carrying my wooden wolf? Had he returned to his tantrums and rage? Or had our brief connection made a difference, and why did it matter so much to me? "Thinking of home?" the beta asked. Too perceptive for comfort, I shook my head, refocusing on my task. "Thinking of infection pathways." "Hold him firmly now," Devon cried out as I cleaned the deepest part of the wound, his body trying instinctively to escape the pain. The other men held him steady as I worked, their eyes watching my every move with growing respect. By the time I had treated all 3 patients, Rafe slashed wounds across his ribs. The older betas, whose name I learned was Morris, sprained wrist and minor cuts. The short winter day was fading into early darkness. My back ached from bending over cots, and hunger gnawed more insistently at my stomach. "You should eat," Morris said as I washed my hands again. "Kitchen hut is the one with the red door. Tell them I sent you." I nodded gratefully. "I'll check on Devon again before I sleep. Keep him drinking the tea whenever he wakes, even if it's just a few sips." Stepping outside, I was struck by how the temperature had plummeted with nightfall. The air felt brittle with cold, each breath painful in my lungs. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, hard and bright as ice crystals. The kitchen hut was warm and aromatic with the smell of some kind of stew. Conversations paused briefly as I entered, curious gazes taking in my light hair, slender build, and unmistakable omega scent. I kept my eyes lowered, moving toward the large pot bubbling over the fire. "You the new healer?" A broad-shouldered woman with a practical braid and beta scent looked me up and down without bothering to disguise her assessment. "Yes," I replied simply. "Morris sent me for food." She nodded, ladling a generous portion of stew into a wooden bowl. "Sit anywhere. Eat while it's hot." I found a place at the end of a long table, away from the main clusters of warriors. The stew was simple but hearty: venison, root vegetables, and wild barley. After days of travel rations, it tasted like a feast. I was halfway through my meal when a shadow fell across the table. Looking up, I found myself facing a tall, imposing alpha with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. His uniform markings identified him as Captain Nolan, the outpost commander Thorne had mentioned. "Omega Ilara," he said, my name an acknowledgement rather than a greeting. "Walk with me when you've finished." It wasn't a request. I swallowed my mouthful of stew and nodded. Appetite suddenly diminished. When the captain had strode away, I forced myself to eat the remainder quickly, knowing I needed the strength for whatever was coming. Outside, Nolan was waiting, his breath visible in the freezing air. Without speaking, he began walking toward the perimeter fence, clearly expecting me to follow. The compound was quieter now, most inhabitants seeking warmth indoors as night settled fully over the mountains. "You've treated the wounded?" Nolan asked when we reached a section of fence that overlooked the dark forest beyond. "Yes, Captain. Devon's infection concerns me, but but he should improve by morning if the herbs work as expected. Nolan nodded, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Good. We need every fighter combat ready. I waited, sensing there was more to this conversation than a status report on the wounded. What did Alpha Darius tell you about your assignment here? He asked finally, turning to study my face. Only that healers were needed at the border outposts, I answered carefully. That rogues had been spotted in increasing numbers. The captain's expression remained impassive, but something in his scent changed, a subtle sharpening that my Omega senses registered as concern. What weren't you told, Captain? I asked, echoing my earlier question to Thorn. Nolan's mouth tightened. These aren't ordinary rogues. They're organized, coordinated, and they're specifically targeting weaknesses in our border defenses. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter night crawled up my spine. You think someone is feeding them information? I know someone is, he said grimly. What I don't know is who. Understanding dawned with cold clarity. And that's why I'm here. An Omega from outside the regular border patrols. Someone with no existing loyalties or connections to anyone at this outpost. Nolan inclined his head slightly, confirming my deduction. The Alpha believes your unique perspective might notice things others would miss. He wants me to spy on his own warriors, I said flatly. He wants you to help protect this pack. Nolan corrected, a hint of steel entering his tone. Including his son. If these borders fall, the rogues won't stop at the outposts. They'll push straight to the heart of our territory. The mention of Prince Leo stirred something protective within me. The image of his small face, vulnerable despite its mask of anger, flashed in my mind. I thought of the silver button in my pocket, his pledge that I would return. Why me? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Why not send one of his trusted warriors under cover? Because no one notices an Omega, Nolan said bluntly. Warriors talk freely around you, assuming you're focused only on your healing duties. You can move through the outpost without raising suspicion. The assessment was pragmatic, unsentimental, and entirely accurate. My invisibility, the very quality that had defined my existence within the pack, was now my greatest asset. What exactly am I looking for? I asked, accepting the unspoken assignment. Unusual behaviors, warriors who ask too many questions about patrol schedules, anyone who leaves the compound alone, especially at night, communications with outsiders. Nolan's gaze was piercing now. You'll report only to me, and only when we can speak privately, as we are now. I nodded, the weight of this secret mission settling heavily upon my shoulders alongside my healing duties. And when I returned to check on Prince Leo? Surprise flickered across Nolan's features. You're returning to the pack house? Alpha's orders, I explained. In 5 days' time. The prince responded to me. Understanding dawned in Nolan's eyes. Ah, the rumors of the boy's condition reached even here. They say he's been unmanageable since his mother left. He's hurting, I said simply, unwilling to betray Leo's vulnerability further by discussing his behaviors. The captain studied me with new interest. You've formed a connection with the Alpha's son. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. A tentative one. He's very mistrustful. With good reason, Nolan muttered, his tone suggesting he knew more about the former Luna's departure than most. Before I could question him, he continued. Your return to the pack house can serve 2 purposes then. Report your observations to me before you leave. With that, he turned to go, clearly considering our conversation concluded. But a question burned in my mind, one I needed answered before I could fully commit to this dangerous game of observation and secrets. Captain, I called after him. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. What happens to the traitor when they're found? Nolan's expression hardened. Alpha Justice, he said simply, and the 2 words carried all the weight of a death sentence. Left alone by the fence, I gazed out at the dark forest, trying to imagine who among the warriors I'd met today might be betraying their pack. What could drive someone to such treachery? Money? Revenge? Love? All seemed possible motivations, all equally dangerous. The silver button in my pocket seemed suddenly heavier. I pulled it out, running my thumb over its cool surface. Prince Leo's face appeared in my mind again, his fierce demand echoing, "So you remember to come back?" I had made a promise to a wounded child, and now I had accepted a mission that might make keeping that promise impossible. If I identified the traitor, would they hesitate to eliminate a troublesome Omega witness? If I failed to find them, would the Alpha hold me responsible when the next attack came? The night wind carried the howl of a lone wolf from somewhere deep in the forest. Not a pack member, but something wild and separate. The sound resonated within me, striking a chord of recognition. I had always been the outsider, the orphaned Omega existing at the margins of pack life. Now that very marginality had placed me at the center of pack politics and danger. I closed my fist around Leo's button, feeling its edges press into my palm. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same quiet strength that had sustained me since my parents' deaths. I would observe. I would heal. And somehow, I would return to the pack house where a small boy with trust issues and a wooden wolf was waiting. As I made my way back to the healing hut to check on Devon's fever, snowflakes began to fall, soft and silent as secrets. The outpost had grown quiet, warriors retreating to barracks and guard posts. Only the occasional shadow moving between buildings disrupted the stillness of the night. One such shadow caught my attention, a figure slipping from the command hut toward the stables, moving with deliberate stealth. I paused, watching as they glanced furtively around before disappearing inside. My heart quickened. Was this innocent? A warrior assigned to late-night stable duty? Or something more sinister? Should I report it immediately to Nolan? Or was I seeing treachery where none existed? Before I could decide, the stable door opened again, and the figure emerged, leading a saddled horse. In the faint light spilling from a nearby window, I caught a glimpse of the warrior's face. Rafe, the Alpha I had treated earlier that day. His wounded ribs should have made riding painful, if not impossible. As he led the horse toward a small side gate, I made my decision. Keeping to the shadows, I followed, my light footsteps soundless in the fresh snow. The game had begun, sooner than expected and with higher stakes than I had imagined. And somewhere, miles away, a prince clutched a wooden wolf and counted the days until my return. I pressed myself against the rough wooden wall of the stables, heart hammering in my chest as Rafe glanced in my direction. Had he sensed me? My Omega scent was naturally fainter than that of alphas or betas, and the prevailing wind carried it away from him. But experienced warriors developed keen instincts for being watched. After a tense moment, Rafe turned away, leading his horse through the small side gate. I waited until he had disappeared into the tree line before moving. Following him directly would be foolish. My tracking skills were minimal, and the forest at night was treacherous even for those familiar with it. Instead, I slipped into the stables, seeking information of a different kind. The building was warm with the bodies of a dozen horses, their gentle breathing and occasional shifts creating a soothing rhythm in the darkness. I moved carefully between the stalls, until I reached the one Rafe's mount had occupied. The horse's tack and supplies might tell me something about his intentions. A journey's expected duration, its purpose, its destination. A small lantern hung from a hook nearby. I lit it, keeping the flame low, and examined the stall. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance. No abandoned saddlebags or forgotten supplies. But as I knelt to check the straw bedding, my fingers encountered something small and hard. Lifting it to the light, I found myself holding a carved wooden token bearing an unfamiliar symbol. 3 slashes crossed by a single diagonal line. I pocketed the token quickly, extinguished the lantern, and made my way back to the healing hut. Whatever Rafe was doing, I needed more information before bringing suspicions to Captain Nolan. A single nighttime ride and a mysterious token weren't proof of treachery. Devon's fever had broken when I checked on him, his sleep now peaceful rather than tormented. Morris was awake, watching me with curious eyes as I mixed a fresh poultice for the young beta's wound. "Late night rounds?" he asked, his tone conversational but his gaze shrewd. I nodded, keeping my focus on my task. "Infection waits for no one. Saw you talking with the captain earlier," Morris continued. "He can be intimidating at first, but Nolan's fair. One of the best leaders I've served under." I made a non-committal sound, wondering if this was innocent conversation or subtle probing. Morris had been at the outpost longer than most. He would know the routines, the personalities, the potential weaknesses in security. "How long have you been stationed here?" I asked, changing the dressing on Devon's shoulder with gentle movements. 3 years this winter, Morris replied. Longer than most. Young wolves get restless at the borders, prefer rotations back to central territories where there's more action of the pleasurable kind. He grinned, then winced as the movement pulled at a cut on his cheek. And Rafe? He seems intense. Morris chuckled. Alpha through and through, that one. Ambitious, too. Volunteered for border duty to catch the Alpha's attention. Wants a position in the inner guard eventually. Interesting. Ambition could be a powerful motivator for either loyalty or betrayal. And is he likely to get it? The beta shrugged. Hard to say. He's skilled in combat but lacks patience. Makes enemies as easily as allies. I finished with Devon and moved to check Morris's bandaged wrist. Any enemies in particular? Something in my tone must have alerted him, because Morris's expression sharpened. Why the interest in Rafe, Omega? I kept my face carefully neutral. He was my first patient here. I like to understand those I heal. Morris studied me for a moment longer before relaxing. Well, he and Captain Nolan have had their disagreements. Strategy differences, mainly. Rafe favors more aggressive patrols, pushing deeper into neutral territory. Nolan's more cautious. This information settled alongside my observations like pieces of a puzzle. Not enough to form a complete picture, but suggestive of shape and pattern. If Rafe disagreed with Nolan's defensive strategy, might he take matters into his own hands? Or worse, ally with outsiders to force a more aggressive stance? Rest now, I told Morris, finishing my examination. The herbs should help with the pain. As I settled onto my own narrow cot in the corner of the healing hut, sleep eluded me. The wooden token pressed against my thigh through the fabric of my pocket, its presence a constant reminder of the dangerous game I'd entered. I thought of Prince Leo, of the silent promise encoded in his silver button. 5 more days until I would see him again, if I survived the growing intrigue around me. The next 4 days passed in a blur of healing duties and careful observation. I treated wounds, mixed remedies, and listened, always listened, to the conversations flowing around me. As Captain Nolan had predicted, my Omega status rendered me nearly invisible in warriors' eyes. They spoke freely in my presence, discussing patrol schedules, personal grievances, and outpost politics. Rafe returned before dawn the morning after his mysterious ride, slipping back through the side gate as if he'd never left. If anyone noticed his absence, they gave no indication. He avoided the healing hut and me, his wounds apparently causing him less concern than whatever secret missions occupied his nights. I observed 3 more nighttime excursions. Not just Rafe, but 2 other warriors whose names I learned were Caney and Jared. They left separately, hours apart, but their furtive movements shared the same careful stealth, the same attention to avoiding guard posts. On the 4th night, I finally seized an opportunity to speak privately with Captain Nolan, finding him alone in the command hut after most of the outpost had retired. "You have something to report," he said, not looking up from the maps spread before him. I placed the wooden token on the table. "I found this in the stable after Rafe took a horse out 4 nights ago. He's gone out again twice since then. 2 others, Caney and Jared, have made similar trips." Nolan picked up the token, his expression darkening as he examined the symbol. "Where exactly did you find this?" "In the straw of Rafe's horse's stall." "It could have fallen from his pocket or been deliberately hidden." The captain's jaw tightened. "This mark belongs to the Shadow Claw Pack. They were driven from their territories 2 years ago for practicing forbidden blood rituals. Those who survived scattered, becoming the worst kind of rogues." A chill ran through me. "You think Rafe is in league with them?" "I think this is damning evidence, but not yet conclusive," Nolan said carefully. "We need to know where they're meeting, what information is being exchanged." "I leave for the pack house tomorrow," I reminded him. "Alpha's orders." Nolan nodded slowly. "Yes, and you'll deliver a full report to Alpha Darius when you arrive. Include everything you've observed, the token, the nighttime departures, the warriors involved." "And if I'm wrong? If there's an innocent explanation?" The captain's eyes met mine, hard as flint. "Then Rafe and the others will have the opportunity to provide it, to the Alpha himself." I swallowed. the weight of potential false accusation settling heavily on my shoulders. "What if Rafe leaves again tonight? I'll have him watched," Nolan assured me. "Your part in this is done, Omega. You've served the pack well." I should have felt relieved, but uneasiness lingered as I left the command hut. Something about the situation felt unresolved, pieces of the puzzle still missing or misaligned. But my time at the outpost was ending. For now. Tomorrow I would return to the pack house, to Prince Leo and his wooden wolf. The journey back to Central Pack territory was mercifully uneventful, though tension knotted my shoulders throughout the day-long trek. My escort, a stoic beta warrior named Ellis, spoke little, seemingly content to travel in silence. I was grateful for his taciturn nature, as it gave me time to organize my thoughts and prepare for my dual responsibilities, reporting to Alpha Darius about possible traitors and reconnecting with his wounded son. As we approached the pack house in the fading light of afternoon, fresh snow began to fall, soft flakes catching in my hair and on my eyelashes. The settlement looked different somehow, smaller, perhaps, or more confined than I remembered. A week at the border, with its vast forests and mountain vistas, had altered my perspective. Ellis led me directly to the pack house rather than to my cabin, indicating that my report was expected immediately. Servants eyed me curiously as we were shown through corridors that were becoming distressingly familiar. The Alpha's study door stood open, revealing Darius himself standing by a window, his powerful frame silhouetted against the gray winter light. "Leave us," he commanded Ellis without turning. The beta bowed and retreated, closing the door behind him. I stood silently, waiting to be acknowledged. The Alpha's scent filled the room, dominant, intimidating, designed by nature to make lesser wolves submit. My knees wanted to buckle, my head to bow, my entire being to diminish in his presence. I resisted, keeping my spine straight as my grandmother had taught me. "My son has asked for you every day," Darius said finally, turning to face me. His expression was unreadable, his eyes measuring. "How is he?" I asked, genuine concern overriding protocol. A flicker of surprise crossed the Alpha's features at my directness. "Improved. He's slept without nightmares. His tutors report he's been more focused." Relief washed through me, more powerful than I'd expected. "I'm glad to hear it. Captain Nolan sent a message ahead of you," Darius continued, moving to sit behind his massive desk. "He mentioned a token, Shadow Claw." I reached into my pocket and placed the wooden disc on his desk. "Yes, Alpha. I found it in the stable after observing Rafe leaving the outpost at night. 2 others, Caney and Jared, displayed similar behavior on subsequent nights." Darius picked up the token, his fingers closing around it with barely contained anger. "Shadow Claw has been a thorn in our side since their disbandment. If they're coordinating with traitors within our pack." "There may be an innocent explanation," I offered, though I didn't entirely believe it myself. The Alpha's gaze sharpened. "You defend them?" "I seek truth, Alpha, as should we all." For a moment I thought I'd overstepped, pushed too far against the boundaries of my station. Then, remarkably, Darius's mouth curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Captain Nolan was right about you," he said. "You see clearly where others are blinded by rank and expectation." Before I could respond to this unexpected assessment, the study door burst open. Prince Leo stood in the doorway, his small chest heaving as if he'd run through the entire pack house. "You came back," he said, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that belied his young age. I smiled, something warm unfurling in my chest at the sight of him. "I promised I would." Leo crossed the room with deliberate steps, stopping just before me. From inside his pocket, he withdrew my wooden wolf carving. "It kept the bad dreams away," he said solemnly, holding it out to me. Instead of taking it, I knelt to his level. "Then perhaps you should keep it a while longer." The prince's eyes widened. "Really?" I nodded. "Really." Something shifted in Leo's expression then. A softening, a trust so fragile it might shatter at a touch. "I showed Eben," he said. "He said it was made with love." "Eben?" I glanced up at Alpha Darius, questioning. "My advisor," he explained. "He has been surprisingly helpful with Leo in your absence." I recalled the older man who had watched me with calculating eyes at our first meeting. Something about the mention of his name sent a whisper of warning through me, though I couldn't have explained why. "Mom?" Leo's voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. When I realized what he'd said, my breath caught. "Leo," his father said sharply, "Ilara is not—" "It's okay," I interrupted, my eyes never leaving the boy's face. "Leo, I'm not your mother. You know that, right?" He nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "But you came back. You promised, and you came back." The simple statement held volumes of meaning, years of abandonment and betrayal condensed into its counterpoint. I had done what his mother had not, kept my word, returned when I said I would. "Yes," I said gently. "I came back." Something flared in Alpha Darius's eyes. Pain, recognition, perhaps even gratitude. He cleared his throat. "Leo, Ilara needs to rest after her journey. She'll join us for the evening meal." The prince clutched the wooden wolf tighter. "Promise?" "I promise," I assured him, the weight of his trust both precious and terrifying. How easily he could be hurt again if circumstances tore me from his life. Leo seemed satisfied with this, and, with a last lingering look at me, allowed a waiting attendant to usher him from the study. When the door closed behind him, Darius released a long breath. "He called you Mom," he said, the words carrying a complex mixture of emotions. "He's searching for connection," I replied carefully, "for someone who won't abandon him." The Alpha studied me with renewed intensity. "And will you abandon him, Omega Ilara? When your border duty is complete, when your usefulness as my eyes and ears has ended?" The question struck at the heart of my own uncertainty. What place could I possibly have in Prince Leo's life long term? An orphaned Omega healer had no claim to royalty, no right to form attachments to the Alpha's son. "I don't know what the future holds," I answered honestly. "But I won't disappear without explanation. I won't leave him wondering why he wasn't enough." Something in my words seemed to reach Darius, penetrating the armor of authority he wore like a second skin. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the man beneath the Alpha, wounded, wary, as scarred by his mate's departure as his son had been. "Her name was Serena," he said unexpectedly. "Leo's mother. She was brilliant, beautiful, willful." His gaze turned distant. "I thought her strength would make her an ideal Luna. I didn't understand that same strength would make her chafe against pack constraints." I remained silent, sensing that Darius was speaking more to himself than to me. "She left a letter," he continued, his voice hardening. "Said she couldn't bear the walls closing in, the endless duties, the suffocation of pack hierarchy. Said she needed freedom more than she needed her own child." The bitterness in his tone revealed a wound still raw despite the passage of years. I thought of Leo, inheriting this legacy of abandonment, interpreting his mother's departure as his own failure. "Children often blame themselves," I said quietly, "even when they're told otherwise." Darius's eyes refocused on me sharply. "Yes, as I'm sure you did when your parents died." The observation, too perceptive and too personal, caught me off guard. "For a while," I admitted. "My grandmother helped me understand it wasn't my fault. And who helped you understand when she died too?" There was no cruelty in the question, only a surprising perceptiveness. "No one," I said simply. "I had to help myself." The Alpha nodded slowly. "And now you help my son." He moved toward the window again, looking out at the falling snow. "Return to your duties at the border outpost tomorrow. Continue your observations, but you will visit the pack house weekly to check on Leo's progress." It was a command wrapped in the thinnest veneer of a medical justification, but I didn't challenge it. In truth, the thought of regular contact with Leo eased an anxiety I hadn't fully acknowledged. "Yes, Alpha," I said, bowing my head in acceptance. "Regarding the potential traitors," Darius continued, his tone shifting to cool authority, "I will handle the matter personally. Say nothing of your suspicions to anyone, including Captain Nolan. As far as anyone knows, your visits to the pack house are solely for my son's benefit." This change in strategy caught me by surprise. "You don't trust Nolan?" The Alpha's expression remained impassive. "I trust very few, Omega Ilara. A luxury of leadership you may someday understand." Before I could decipher this cryptic statement, A knock at the door announced the arrival of the advisor I'd seen previously. Eben, Leo had called him. He entered with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to the Alpha's presence, his shrewd eyes taking in my appearance with that same calculating interest I'd noticed before. "Alpha, the messengers from the Northern Coalition have arrived," he announced, before turning to me with a thin smile. "Ah, the Omega Healer returns. Prince Leo will be pleased." Something in his tone set my nerves on edge. Though his words were perfectly courteous, I offered a respectful nod, but remained silent. "Ilara will be joining us for the evening meal," Darius informed him. "Have quarters prepared for her overnight stay." "Of course, Alpha." Eben's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll make the arrangements immediately." As he turned to leave, I noticed something small and wooden peeking from his pocket, a token identical to the one I'd found in Rafe's stall. My breath caught, and for a crucial second, I failed to control my expression. Eben's eyes narrowed as he caught my reaction, his gaze dropping to the desk where the Shadowclaw token lay in plain sight. Understanding passed between us in a flash of mutual recognition. "Alpha," I began, but Eben moved with shocking speed for an older man. "Guards!" he shouted, backing toward the door. "The Omega is an infiltrator, a Shadowclaw spy." Darius's face darkened with fury. "What nonsense is this, Eben? She carries their mark," the advisor accused, pointing at the token. "Ask her how she really obtained it. Not from some warrior at the outpost, but from her Shadowclaw masters." The absurdity of the accusation might have been laughable, if not for the deadly serious consequences. I stood my ground, meeting Darius's questioning gaze steadily. "I found the token exactly as I reported," I stated firmly. "But it seems I'm not the only one familiar with Shadowclaw symbols. Your advisor carries the same mark in his pocket right now." Darius turned to Eben, whose face had gone pale beneath its weathered tan. "Is this true?" The advisor's expression twisted with hatred as he looked at me. "This Omega witch has bewitched your son, and now seeks to turn you against your most loyal servant. Search her belongings. You'll find proof of her treachery." "Search him," I countered, my voice calmer than I felt. "The token is in his right pocket." For a terrible moment, the Alpha looked between us, judgment suspended. Then, with deliberate movements, he approached his advisor. "Empty your pockets, Eben." A dangerous smile spread across the older man's face. "Of course, my Alpha." His hand dipped into his pocket and emerged holding not a wooden token, but a small silver whistle. Before anyone could react, he raised it to his lips and blew. No sound emerged, at least none that human ears could detect, but the effect was immediate. Shouts of alarm rose from the compound outside, followed by the unmistakable sounds of fighting. An attack, coordinated to coincide with Eben's signal. "You see, Darius," Eben said, dropping all pretense of respect. "Some of us grew tired of waiting for you to claim what should be ours. The northern territories, the eastern forests, all wasted under your cautious rule." Darius lunged for his advisor, but Eben was surprisingly agile, dodging aside and drawing a concealed dagger. "Shadowclaw offers a more ambitious vision. After tonight, they'll have a new Alpha, one willing to expand, to conquer, to claim what's rightfully ours." Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. The border attacks, the information leaks, the nighttime meetings, all orchestrated by the Alpha's own advisor, using discontented warriors like Rafe to further his conspiracy. The compound erupted into chaos as rogues breached the gates. Through the window, I could see Shadowclaw warriors pouring into the pack grounds, engaging with loyal pack members in vicious combat. My thoughts flew to Leo, vulnerable, alone in his quarters, possibly targeted as part of this coup. Without conscious decision, I bolted for the door, ignoring Eben's snarl of rage as Darius tackled him to the ground. The corridors of the pack house had become a battleground. I flattened myself against walls, ducked behind furniture, using my Omega ability to move unnoticed to advantage as I made my way toward Leo's chambers. The scent of blood and fear saturated the air, making my heart race and my wolf stir restlessly beneath my skin. I found Leo's door guarded by a single loyal warrior, wounded but standing firm. "The prince," I gasped. "Is he safe?" The guard recognized me and nodded grimly. "Inside, barricaded as ordered. Let me through," I pleaded. "He knows me," trusts me. After a moment's hesitation, the guard stepped aside. I slipped through the door, calling Leo's name softly. Ilara? His voice came from the bathroom, small and frightened. I found him huddled in the bathtub, my wooden wolf clutched to his chest. At the sight of me, his eyes filled with tears of relief. "The bad men came back," he whispered. "Like before." "Before?" I asked, gathering him into my arms. "When Mother left," he murmured. "There was fighting then, too. Eben said she ran away because she was scared. But I heard her fighting with him. He was angry about the northern packs." A missing piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Had Serena discovered Eben's treachery years ago? Had her departure been not abandonment but flight? Or worse, had she been eliminated for her knowledge? "We need to find somewhere safer," I told Leo, pushing these questions aside for now. "Can you be very brave and very quiet?" He nodded, his small face setting in determination. "Like a wolf on the hunt." Exactly like that. We crept from his chambers, the guard joining us as we navigated the increasingly dangerous corridors. The fighting had intensified, the snarls and howls of partial shifts echoing through the pack house, as wolves gave in to battle instinct. "The old tunnels," the guard suggested, gesturing toward a seemingly ordinary panel in the wall. "They lead to the ceremonial caves. The prince will be safe there." I nodded, following as he pressed a hidden mechanism, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Leo clung to my hand, his earlier fear replaced by a kind of fierce focus I recognized from his father. The tunnel was dark and smelled of earth and old magic, remnants of ceremonies performed by generations of pack leaders. We moved as quickly as silence allowed, the sounds of battle growing more distant with each turn of the passage. "Mother showed me these once," Leo whispered. "She said they were older than the pack itself." The revelation surprised me. What kind of Luna would share secret escape routes with a child, barely old enough to remember them? Perhaps one who feared she might need them someday. We emerged into a large cavern, illuminated by phosphorescent fungi that cast an ethereal blue glow across ancient stone walls. Carved symbols, some I recognized from pack lore, others strange and unfamiliar, covered every surface. "We'll be safe here," the guard assured us, though the blood seeping from his wounded side belied his confident tone. I helped him sit against a wall and examined his injury, a deep slash that needed immediate attention. "Leo," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I need to treat his wound. Can you help me look for certain plants that might grow in here? The glowing mushrooms mean there might be other useful ones." The distraction worked. Leo nodded solemnly and began exploring the edges of the cavern while I tore strips from my undershirt to bind the guard's wound. "The Alpha?" the guard asked weakly. "Fighting Eben when I left," I replied, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. He seemed to have the upper hand. The guard nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Good. Suspected the old fox for months. Too many coincidences." A small cry of triumph from Leo interrupted us. "Ilara, I found some! The fuzzy ones you showed me in your book." I looked up to see him pointing at a patch of moss growing near a small underground spring, a rare variety with remarkable coagulant properties. "Perfect," I called. "Bring me a handful." As Leo carefully gathered the moss, a shadow fell across the cavern entrance. I tensed, positioning myself between the prince and potential danger. Eben stood in the passageway, clothes torn and bloody, a maniacal gleam in his eyes. "How touching," he sneered. "The Omega protects the pup." The wounded guard attempted to rise but collapsed back with a groan. I stood alone between Eben and Leo, no weapon but my determination. "It's over, Eben," I said with more confidence than I felt. "By now the Alpha knows everything about Shadowclaw, about your betrayal, perhaps even about what really happened to Serena." Fury twisted his features. "That interfering bitch. She should have minded her place, accepted her role. Instead, she discovered my plans and threatened to expose everything." His lips curled in a cruel smile. "Eliminating her was almost too easy. Grieving mate, traumatized pup. The perfect cover for my continued work." Behind me, Leo made a small, wounded sound. I reached back, finding his hand and squeezing it tightly. "And now you'll join her," Eben snarled, advancing with his bloodied dagger. Another tragic casualty of the Shadow Claw attack. I braced myself, mind racing for a strategy, a weapon, anything that might save Leo. In that desperate moment, something shifted within me, a certainty, a clarity that cut through fear. I had spent my life making myself small, invisible, harmless. But for Leo, for this child who had called me Mom with such fragile hope, I would become whatever was needed: protector, fighter, survivor. As Eben lunged, a thunderous roar echoed through the cavern. A massive black wolf burst from the tunnel, its powerful form slamming into the traitor with bone-crushing force. Alpha Darius had arrived, fully shifted into his wolf form, magnificent and terrible in his rage. The battle was brief and decisive. Eben never stood a chance against the Alpha's fury. When it ended, Darius shifted back to human form, his eyes finding his son's. "Leo," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Are you hurt?" The prince shook his head, still clutching my hand. Ilara protected me, like Mom would have. Something profound passed across Darius's features. Grief, understanding, acceptance. He looked at me, standing bloodied but unbowed, still shielding his son despite the danger's end. "Yes," he said softly. She did. 3 months later, I stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching as Leo concentrated on his lesson. His small face was scrunched in determination as he practiced the basic defensive moves Darius was teaching him. The aftermath of the Shadow Claw attack had transformed many things. The traitors at the border outpost had been identified and dealt with. Captain Nolan had been promoted to Beta Commander for his loyalty. And I had been given a choice. "He needs you," Darius had said simply. "We both do." And so I had remained, not as a temporary presence, but as a permanent one. Official healer to the pack, unofficial guardian to a prince who still carried my wooden wolf carving, and still sometimes called me Mom when nightmares woke him. The silver button he had given me now hung on a leather cord around my neck, a reminder of promises made and kept. As I watched father and son move in synchrony across the training ground, I felt something long dormant unfurl within me, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of home. I was not Serena. I could never replace what Leo had lost. But I could offer something new: steadfast presence, unwavering loyalty, healing for wounds both seen and unseen. And in return, this wounded alpha child and his guarded father had given me what I'd believed forever beyond my reach: a family. Leo looked up, catching sight of me watching. His serious expression bloomed into a rare, brilliant smile that transformed his entire face. He waved excitedly, and after a moment's hesitation, Darius turned and offered a smaller, more reserved gesture of his own. I raised my hand in return, feeling the weight of their trust, their need, their growing affection. The wooden wolf carving that had once been my grandmother's comfort now protected a young prince from nightmares. The orphaned Omega, who had learned to be invisible, now stood in the light, seen and valued. Sometimes the most broken creatures are the ones most in need of healing. And sometimes, in healing others, we heal ourselves.